I know, like, I can look back and think that the few moments that stick out as the toughest of my life actually led to some of the most beautiful things in my life. And I would not have chosen them, but I would never trade them now. That's still hard to remember, though, when our kids are going through something. I think sometimes seeing our kids suffer is more acutely painful than suffering ourselves, for sure. Yeah.
Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health with Sara Banta. I'm a busy wife, mom of 3, and an NANP certified supplement professional, but that's not all. I'm also the founder of the multi-award-winning Accelerated Health Products, a brand offering innovative natural solutions to optimize your health and your family's health. And this podcast isn't just a source of information, it's a community. We're all here to learn and grow on our health journeys, regardless of where your starting point is. And this podcast is a springboard into learning, and the free group coaching on Telegram is where we continue learning together. You can ask questions. I post tips and tools to deepen your health and keep you motivated and keep going forward. So here's what you can expect. New episodes every Monday and Wednesday with in-depth health discussions and expert guests. Hot topic issues that are in the news every Friday to keep things interesting. And then, of course, the free group coaching on Telegram to continue the conversation. The details can be found on my website, sarabanthealth.com. Have you thought about detoxing? Well, I've created over 10 unique, easy detox cleanses to help you reset your body, but you feel great day one. So take the detox cleanse quiz on my website to figure out which one is right for you. And if you don't know where to start with supplements, just complete the health goals form for your free supplement protocol. It's from me to you. So just taking a few steps forward with your health will change your life, and I'm here every step of the way. I'm so excited. We've got Katie Wells back, and she is a mom of 6, which is double of what I handle. I can't imagine. And she has a background in journalism. She took health into her own hands and started researching to find answers on her own health struggles. She has over 1,500 blog posts, 3 books, and was named one of the 100 most influential people in health and wellness. We are super blessed to have Katie here today. How are you, Katie?
I'm so excited to be here and so excited to get to chat with you again.
I am too, and this conversation is one of my favorites because, you know, my health journey started with my rock bottom, and I was on my own journey, but it really didn't take hold until my son had leukemia. And your health, your life goes by the wayside when something's wrong with your child, right? But then there's this balance, and you've got to be taking care of yourself. And there's these stressors from each one of your kids, your husband or spouse, and then your job, and maybe elderly parents. And we are sandwiched into this massive amounts of stress and just trying to balance it all, because if we fall apart, everybody else falls apart, right?
Absolutely. I think moms especially set the nervous system tone for the whole house. So to the degree that we take care of ourselves and are able to stay as calm as possible and regulated as possible, that actually has sort of a invisible ripple effect into our entire household. But to your point, like also when, especially you have a sick child, that becomes your focus and where your energy pours. So it's even probably more important then to make sure you are taking care of yourself so that you have that energy to keep pouring into your child.
So as I struggle with 3 kids, and you know, my preschool teacher of my children always said, Sara, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, right? So it's not like these kids are going to go off to college, get married, and you are hands-free and there's no issues. I almost think that I'm more mentally taxed by my college kids than my younger kids, because doing diapers and feeding is easy compared to emotional trauma. So as a mom of 3, I want to know how you handle 6. And what challenges do you face on a daily basis, on an annual basis? I mean, we see you, you're amazing. You do a great podcast. You write amazing articles, books, and everything like that. But all of us are human. So what are the biggest challenges that you find?
Well, thank you. I'm glad it looks that way on the outside. And I will say, certainly, I have not navigated this perfectly a lot of the time. It's been very much a learning path for me as well. In fact, years ago, I got to a point where I was so stressed keeping all the plates in the air, like you were talking about with business, with kids, and just everything that's on our plates as moms, that I felt like I couldn't keep doing it anymore and something had to give. And obviously, that wasn't going to be my kids. And so I was at the point of being willing to pretty much let go of wellness mama entirely. And then I realized my stress wasn't actually coming from work. A lot of it was coming just the mental stress from at home. And so I started getting curious and asking why. And I realized that when it came to business, it felt natural and easy to run everything with systems and have KPIs and have clear parameters and clear work hours. And so there was structure to it. And so even if I was doing a lot, I didn't feel stressed because I wasn't in a place of open loops all the time. I knew when things were going to happen. I knew where I was going. Whereas at home at the time, I was trying to manage 8 people's lives entirely in my head and keep up with meal planning and appointments and activities and homeschooling and everything else. And so I started an experiment with what if I adopted the same level of structure and intentionality to home life that I have in business, which led to some really cool shifts as well, because I realized also in business, I had learned the hard way that I at some point could not do everything myself. And I was able to slowly build an amazing team. And that was the only way Wellness Mama was able to function the way it did. But at home, I was still trying to do everything myself, even stuff my kids could do on their own. So there were shifts like learning to respect the capability and autonomy of my kids and not sort of disrespect them by assuming I was the only one who could do things correctly, and let them get involved in the mission and the culture and where our family was going to go and our goals that we were oriented toward. And even small ones like keeping an orderly house so that we weren't all stressed all the time, or helping with kitchen stuff and meal cleanup or even meal preparation. So putting structure in place took a little bit of time, but over time had such a huge payoff on the mental load side of motherhood. And I think that's the part that is now being talked about more, but I still feel like hasn't been talked about enough, is that sort of invisible labor that moms especially tend to carry when we're taking care of everyone all the time and taking on that emotional burden. And even the language we use around that, if our partner helps us, they're just helping, because that's the emotional labor we're still carrying. And so developing a family culture that was more collaborative and that took into account everybody's ability to actually help work toward those common goals helped tremendously. And then I think the other area where I was also a slow learner on was, just like you said, of being able to put your own oxygen mask on first and really prioritize taking care of yourself. I think culture still subtly kind of tells us that that's selfish. And I think I've learned slowly that it's actually one of the most selfless things you can do as a mom, is to take care of yourself so that when you do show up for your kids, you're showing all the way up and you're all the way present. And that comes from having balance in those other areas of life and from doing the things that still give you joy, which also models for them that it's okay and good and important to pursue the things that bring you joy, and not only to sacrifice always at the expense of others, but to like make sure that you're also refilling yourself. And so, like I said, it's been a slow journey, but hopefully one I'm in a more balanced place of modeling for my kids now.
Well, the first step is to recognize that none of us are perfect. And I can tell you that my college kids are real quick to tell me my faults now, that the mistakes that I made when they were younger, when I thought I was doing great. But I love that you had a system in place when they're young, and I did the same thing. And if any young mom is out there, I would just emphasize what Katie's saying as far as instill those disciplines young, because it will, when they're in high school, it's like you don't have to ask them to empty the dishwasher. You don't have to ask them to make their own lunches or do their laundry. My kids, I did not have to give them a lesson in doing laundry before they go off to college, like most kids, right? That was just a no-brainer. I've taught them how to earn money and the value of $1 and spending their own money on what they want. as you have. And I love your philosophy on earning money and building businesses as children. That was something that I was like, shoot, my kids are too old to start that now, but I wish I had done that. Because it also, when the house is run smoothly, you're calmed down, you actually feel almost this dopamine hit, increases your mood, because you feel like I'm not just running my business well, but I'm running my household well, which is like another business, and giving them that ownership. I will also never forget the day my son was in 4th grade. He was always skinny. And so I always worried if he was eating enough food, and he'd come home with some, he didn't eat all of his food. Now, mind you, he made his lunch, and I gave him that ownership, and I gave my kids the ownership of making their lunch. They get these choices to make sure it's healthy and all of that. And I said, you didn't finish your lunch. And he goes, Mom, at least I didn't throw it away like everybody else, which triggered the thought that these other kids have no appreciation for the food, for the money that it costs to buy that food, for all of it, because they're not given ownership. And you're also instilling that team player mentality, right? You've got 8 people on your team. You're the team captain, but you are only as strong as your weakest link as a team player. So with that being said, can you discuss some of the common causes of stress for the modern parents? It's not like our mother's generation.
You're so right. And I think, like you said, there's so much wisdom, and especially when kids are young, if your kids are still young, letting them be involved as much as possible, because they naturally want to be involved and to help out and to learn at that age. And so teaching in that space is, I think, really valuable. I feel like one rule that's helped me a lot for myself is that I won't do anything for my kids that they're capable of doing themselves, because that's actually disrespecting their capability and their ability to do it themselves. Which also over time takes a lot of things off my plate when they're capable, like you talked about, of doing their own laundry or preparing their own breakfast or lunch. Those are now hours in my day where I get to just be present with them or work on stuff if they're doing other things. So I think that's such a valuable piece of advice that you just gave. And you're so right. We're living in a very fascinating time and navigating things that we can't really get great advice from necessarily from our parents or grandparents, because these are new things. I hear it talked about that our generation is the last one that will remember what life was like before social media, before smartphones, before the internet being so ubiquitous that it's in literally all aspects of our lives, from now our refrigerators to our plugs to our light bulbs, everything's so connected. And I think, this has been talked about some, but I think it's worth looking at more, is that there's kind of a fracture happening in that we're more connected technologically, but we're statistically much less connected like in actual proximity with people, and like strength of community has gone down. And I think this matters a lot because we have seen the statistics probably that loneliness is actually more dangerous than smoking. And the counterpoint to that is what I've always noticed with the blue zone studies is that, we could debate all day the intricacies of, did they eat more fish or not? Did they drink red wine? Is that why they're so healthy? But the commonality they all have is that, yes, maybe they walked more, maybe they ate slower, maybe they drank a little bit of wine, but they did those things with people that they loved. And they had very, very strong communities. And even when we see minor pockets of blue zones, that is the commonality that persists, is that really strong community. So I think that starts at home, but also doesn't end at home, especially as women. I think that isolation after the last few years has really taken a toll on women. And there is something to friendships with other women that isn't fulfilled entirely, even by the most amazing spouse in the world, or even by our children, and it shouldn't be. But I feel like being so technologically connected has actually made it harder for us to be in community in real life. And so I think if there's one takeaway there, is to any degree that even if we have to build that community, to prioritize that in our life. I also think because of the advent of the technology we're seeing today, it's so easy to literally never have to go outside, never interact with nature. And we hear doctors and health experts now talking about what they call nature deficit disorder, where we're meant to live in alignment with the natural rhythms of light and seasons and temperature. And we have the ability to completely disconnect from that, but that's not what our biology was designed for. And so I think before we even get into the realm of talking about all the amazing things that we do have access to because of connectedness and technology with supplements and protocols and biohacking and so many cutting edge things, I think we first have to get back in touch with nature and with relationships with people. And then all of those other things will be more effective because we have that sort of blue zone factor of community. And that said, I also know how hard that is when you're a busy mom and you're just trying to juggle all the things you have to do in general. You have to almost make an effort to build that community in. But I think whether it's like dinners with other families, mom's nights out, just having friends that you can talk to regularly, that actually makes a tremendous difference. And we actually see data on that, which is really, really fascinating. I also think we're still learning to navigate women now being as much as men in the working world, but then still handling the majority of household tasks as well. And I don't know that there's a clear, perfect answer to that, but I think it's a balancing act that we each have to figure out as we go, to make sure that we don't get overwhelmed and burned out, which are the two most common words that mental health experts hear from moms, is that they're overwhelmed and burned out. And like we talked about earlier, when we're in that state, we're not showing up well for anybody in our lives, especially for ourselves. And the relationship we have with ourselves is the one that we're modeling for our kids, and that becomes their example for the inner voice they have. And so I think starting with that in whatever way is best for you. And that's also where it gets a little bit more difficult, because I wish that there was just a blueprint I could give someone of like, do these things in this order and this will work for you. But I think you and I have even alluded to this in past conversations. We are all each so unique that when it comes to physical health, there's a level of personalization and experimentation with yourself to find out what your most important pieces are that are going to be most impactful. And perhaps the most valuable pursuit we go on in physical health is the experimentation to figure out what that is. And the same is true with these other factors as well, as we have to figure out the personalization and what's actually going to work for us over time. And that's where it gets a little more difficult, because you can't just follow the system necessarily that works from someone else, but you can learn from their experimentation and maybe from their framework some things to try that might help you to really dial that in for yourself.
Oh my gosh, you hit so many good points. And I wanted to just emphasize, because like I said, Katie's not perfect. I'm not perfect. Surprise, surprise. But during the pandemic, I'm an introvert. So it was really easy for me. And I remember when the pandemic started, it said, for all of you introverts out there, go check on your extrovert friends, right? Well, it became so easy to be a homebody. I work at home. My kids were at home. They're my favorite people. I don't get tired of them. So it was very easy for me to then just text and do group chats with other moms, and even Bible study groups that were now just online or just through text. And I wasn't getting out, but I'm so healthy. I was, doing my eating right, and I was doing my supplements, and I was working out. But Katie, I also wasn't getting outside like you talked about. And what started to happen was my sleep was not good anymore. And for all of you moms out there, no supplement, no diet, no exercise replaces good sleep. That is the cornerstone of health. And also stress will derail your sleep as well. So you have to get all of these other things in line to get that sleep in line. So with that being said, I forced myself to start going to a yoga class, which there's community. It fit into my schedule because it replaced my workout time, right? So it wasn't like I felt like I'm losing time or wasting time. I have committed to making sure the Bible study actually meets in person. And I'm walking my dogs twice a day, in the morning, but then at dusk. And that just walking at night, I literally go for 10 minutes around the block at a stroll. I'm not working out. I'm not huffing and puffing, but just to calm down that cortisol, that stress, give myself some space, but all of that circadian rhythm, natural light that is hitting my eyes in the right time, in the right place, has really impacted my sleep in a really positive way. I've also, like you're saying, with all of this social media and connectivity, it also literally physically scrambles your brain. And I will feel my brain get a headache, blurred vision if I'm looking at my devices too long. And it's just fact. That's what is happening. And as the phones get more advanced and we're into 5G and all of this stuff, it's only going to get more impactful. And so you need that nature to combat those negative EMFs. And that's your biggest way to combat it. Then there's that balance. We always talk about balance. The reality is we're never going to have balance in our marriage, as a mom, as a business owner, in our health. We have these pieces to the puzzle, and some are going to be high and some are going to be low at different times in our life. But the goal is to try to be okay with it, not stress over it, but move it in the right direction. And the next thing I want to talk about, which goes along with this, is that guilt, the mom guilt. There's the guilt of not doing enough, not being enough. Do you look pretty and have your lipstick on for when your husband comes home? Are you cooking amazing home-cooked meals 7 nights a week? Are your kids perfectly disciplined and acting right? Are they socially doing well? All of the stuff we take on. And that's something actually I'm learning as my kids get older. It still happens where I have to learn to separate myself from the emotional stressors that they have, because they've got to learn their lessons, right? And us moms don't want to take care of everything for our kids. Yes, we hate watching them suffer, but they need to suffer on their own. And so can you talk a little bit more about the mom guilt that we carry and what to do about it?
Such a good question. And I feel like social media has also probably made this tougher because we see every mom's best face forward on social media, and our brains like to make the assumption that that's how their whole life looks. And of course, any of us who are on social media know that what shows up on social media is not what 24 hours of our day looks like, but our brain still likes to sort of like project that onto us as mom guilt. And I think this is a thing that like it's our work to do internally. And it's actually been quite the journey for me the past probably decade or so at least. I feel like with the little ones and the busyness of the first few was all toddlers, I was so busy that wasn't as on my mind. But now that they're older and I have a little bit more bandwidth, there is that thought of like, am I doing enough? Am I doing it wrong? Do I need to do something different? I think part of it comes, some relief from that stress comes from respecting, like you said, that they are each their own autonomous, infinite being. And that while we get to walk this journey with them, we're not actually responsible for their journey. We're responsible for supporting them, but we're not responsible for the choices they're going to make, for the journey they take, for their own outcomes in their life. And I think that's actually one of the harder things as a mom, is to step back and let go of that, because we of course wish we could just wave the magic wand and life would work out wonderfully for them all the time. Yeah. But yet any of us who are honest can look back and probably see times in our lives that we would have at the time said were very difficult, and then see such positive things that came in our life as a result of working through those times. I know, like, I can look back and think that the few moments that stick out as the toughest of my life actually led to some of the most beautiful things in my life. And I would not have chosen them, but I would never trade them now. That's still hard to remember, though, when our kids are going through something. I think sometimes seeing our kids suffer is more acutely painful than suffering ourselves, for sure. Yeah. One thing that's been helpful to me is to try to focus on my own emotional regulation in any of those moments versus their behavior or them. Because I think our kids have a beautiful, unique way to trigger us because they were raised with us and they have aspects of us within them. And so they can do things that we find very triggering. And so I try to remind myself that I'm responsible for my emotional reaction to that, not their behavior. So even if there is something in their behavior that would be ideal to change at some point for them to choose to change, fixing their behavior is not actually going to fix my emotional reaction that's happening as a result of that trigger. But I do have control of my own emotional choices and my responses and reactions. So if I focus on that and use it as a place of curiosity to find out why am I being triggered? Or where is this in me? Like, what in me is reacting to this scenario that's happening in my family? I have found some fascinating connections there, and then been able to work through some things, kind of with that idea that if you spot it, you got it. So if something annoys you in another person, it's likely because you have that trait and you're maybe in denial about it yourself. Also, if they've gotten older, one thing that I found helpful, though also humbling, is Dr. Kelly Brogan had some great advice in one of her podcasts. She said she asked her daughters 2 questions. She asked them, what's something that I have done that hurt you in the past that still hurts you when you think about it now? Mm-hmm. And what do you need from me now in life that I'm not giving you? And to ask those questions and then to listen, not to defend or react or argue when they answer. But I feel like if you can give them space to answer those questions honestly, and if they feel comfortable enough to answer those questions, it was so relationship building with my kids. And like her experience, my kids did not say I did everything perfectly. And there were things that are seemingly small to me, but that were a big deal to them, whether it was just my reactions to something that they did when they were much younger, or if I got upset because something broke or whatever it was. And then those became places where I could actually build the relationship stronger by understanding their reality. You know, someone explained to me, or I think Kelly Brogan talks about this too, actually, is like when we were kids, if you think back to it, we maybe weren't even aware that our parents were emotional beings on their own. But certainly that was not the forefront of what was occupying our mind, was our parents' emotional experience of life. And so if we can understand that that's where our kids are operating from, and that we have the context of being adults with more life experience, more things we've been through, and hopefully more emotional regulation, I think that brings a calmness to the relationship that also helps alleviate some of that mom guilt. But I think it's definitely a tough and complex topic, and one that society does not set us up to have an easy path through right now.
Oh my gosh, I love what you just said. I'm going to ask those questions to all 3 of my kids today. And the hardest part is going to keep my mouth shut, right? And to not become defensive and say, oh, well, that's because, and you don't know, right? The one thing that I've done with my children when they go through such tough things, because I saw it in my own life, in my own health journey, when I asked God, why am I going through this? But then fast forward to seeing the beauty that came out of the struggle. At that point, I'm like, there's a reason for every challenge. So whenever one of my children go through something so hard, it helps me as well as them is to say, I can't wait to see what God does with this. Now, if you're not religious, I can't wait to see what the universe does with this, or how this plays out, because something so beautiful is going to come out of it. And this is making you so strong and able to persevere and pivot in life, and all of these things, which then give them hope that this is for good. And I'm going to keep moving forward. And that lesson of just keep moving forward, which brings me to the topic of morning routines. Because for me, when I'm having a struggle and it literally is hard to put one foot in front of the other, I always have my morning routine. It always gets my day going. I always feel better after I finish. And then I feel like I can take on the world, because there's something in my day that I could depend on, that no one could take away from me. And I was giving it to myself. It was for me, right? So let's talk about morning routines and how that structure can help with stress and challenges and all that we're going through.
Oh, such a good point. And quickly to piggyback also on something that you said, one experiment I've been trying the last year or so is I call it shortening the gratitude gap. Because as we talked about, when we have those difficult things in life, we eventually can look back and realize all the positive benefits that came from going through that struggle. And what I realized was, if that has been true 100% of the time in my life, that the hardest things led to such beautiful things, and I eventually could find gratitude for them, what if I could shorten that gap with the goal of one day eventually finding gratitude even in the struggle, even before I know whatever good may come from it. Because I think gratitude also is such a beneficial nervous system state to be in, but also like helps really undo some of those stress patterns. When we're in gratitude, we're not worrying, we're not anxious, we're not like in a anxiety, stress, or scarcity mindset. And so I try to just put little reminders of gratitude in my day for that reason, which actually built into the morning routine question as well. And I love that you do this as well. I would guess we maybe have some similarities in our morning routine, and I would love to hear yours as well. Um, for me, I've finally gotten to a point where my sleep is more dialed in. And like you, I had some challenges with that at different times. So I naturally kind of wake up around sunrise or sometimes a little later. So sometimes 7, but usually never after 7. And then I have a few kind of concrete rules around my morning routine. One is sunshine before screen. So I love that you talked about morning sunlight as well. I think this is one of, hands down, the best free tools that we all have available to us, is to, before we get into both the busyness of life that's connected to our technology and the artificial light that's connected to our technology, to go outside, ideally if possible, barefoot on the ground. You don't have to look directly at the sun, but just let the natural light hit your eyes. And the studies on this are so amazing, of actually how this dramatically can impact your circadian rhythm, set you up for good sleep at night, sort of start the clock for when you're going to produce melatonin, help your cortisol rhythms, especially if you do that pre-caffeine in the morning, and even really benefit hormones. To the drastic side of this, the camping study showed that even just a week of camping without artificial light almost completely reversed any circadian rhythm related issues people had. So we're beings that are meant to interact with the light of our natural environment, and our biology takes so many cues from that. So if you don't already do that, that's one easy change that doesn't cost anything that you might notice a drastic difference from. In the same way, like if you can get a little bit of bright midday sunlight, that reinforces the timing again. And then watching the sunset is a natural source of red light, which, we buy all these fancy red light panels for, but the sun gives it to us every day for free if we just go outside for 10 minutes. So I think that's one easy change. So that's one of my rules. Also, my rule is like hydration and protein before caffeine, because for moms, we talk about stress. There can actually be the biological component of cortisol being out of balance. It's very common, especially in moms, especially when we've had babies that kept us up all night. Mm-hmm. And adding caffeine to the system on an empty stomach before we've given our body light signaling, the body can read that as pretty intense stress. So I noticed a big change in how I felt in my mental bandwidth when I set that as a habit and made sure that as soon as I wake up, I have a quart-sized jar of salt water with minerals in it on my nightstand. I drink that first, I go outside, I breathe, I'm present. Sometimes I go for a walk, but I do those things before I put any kind of stressor on my system, like caffeine or artificial light or looking at work emails or anything like that. There's also some cool data on that, eating protein first, especially if we can get at least 30 grams pretty close to waking up. This is one negative I've seen with this trend of intermittent fasting. I think there's actually tremendous benefit to time-restricted eating if you are in a non-stressed state. Right. But I think especially for women, we would benefit from doing that shifted earlier in the day versus later. Like, I know it's easier to skip breakfast, especially if our cortisol is kind of out of whack, but that's a stress signal on the body. Whereas if we get protein first thing, nourish ourselves, get a lot of micronutrients, send our body all those safety signals, and then if anything, stop eating when the sun goes down, that's a way to get that time-restricted window, but in a way that's circadian aligned. So those are my non-negotiables in my morning routine. I will often also journal or do a gratitude practice, or I said sometimes go for a walk before I get on any technology. And then also, if my kids are awake yet, I love to check in with them and have time and be present before I shift into any work-related time as well. But like I said, I would love to hear anything on yours that I'm not already trying.
Yeah, so I wake up, my dog wakes me up, so an alarm does not wake me up. It tends to be before the sun comes up, around 5:30. I love the quiet before anyone else is awake. Because the sun hasn't come up yet, I lay down and I visualize my day. I visualize what I want for my children. I visualize just breathing and calming down. I will then have my coffee. And I do agree with you on the protein. Protein is my first meal. I don't do it as early as you do, which for what you're saying is 1,000% correct. Fasting is a stressor, and us moms are already stressed. And most of us are walking around with hypothyroidism. And I love the word that you use was safe. Does your body feel safe? Because if it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't know if it's being chased by a tiger or going to hit a famine for a year, or if you're just upset about your child's fight at school. So your body doesn't know. So that safe feeling is going to help with the cortisol management. And as us moms are getting older and our ovaries are dying and our adrenals are taking over the sex hormone production, our adrenals are being tapped out even more. So it takes less to get us fatigued, to get us to that burned out stage. So you want to make sure you feel safe. So with that being said, if I'm overly stressed, I will make sure that I have something to eat earlier rather than later. My morning though, I start out in my sauna. Once the sun comes up, I will go outside for 10 minutes, turn on my sauna, and then I will actually go in the sauna before my workout. But at the end of my workout, I always end with a walk at 20 minutes with my dogs. It's in the sun. It's bringing down that cortisol that can actually be shot up a little bit from the workout, just to calm my system down, making sure I'm hydrated just like you, not just with water, but with minerals, with salt. And if you're having your coffee, put that salt in your coffee even, or match it with the salt water ounce for ounce. That's really important. And people ask, am I allowed to drink coffee? That is something that you need to ask yourself. Are you needing 3 to 4 cups of coffee just to get by? Your adrenals are tapped. Time to quit the coffee for a little bit. Can you have just 1 cup of coffee and feel good for the rest of the day? Great, have it, but make sure you're hydrating, make sure you're taking in the minerals, make sure you're taking in enough protein. I've done a lot of talking in my groups lately about protein intake. Us women, for some reason, are scared of protein. And there was just a study that came out that said if you overeat protein, you're not going to gain fat, you're going to actually gain lean muscle. And that was even with people that weren't working out, which was incredible. That just shows you the power of protein. And it's just going to stabilize everything and make you feel more grounded as when you are having to deal with kids going left and right and all of the things. I will not go without a workout. Now, if I'm tired, then that workout is just the walk or it is yoga, but I'm putting on my workout clothes and that hour is for me and no one's going to take it away. And when I'm in the sauna, I'm also meditating, sweating things out, hydrating with electrolytes, of course, but I can be listening to a sermon or I can be listening to a podcast for just learning, or I can just be meditating. So those two things are non-negotiables. And literally, I feel like I can be, facing earthquakes and volcanoes if I get that morning routine in and I know that I have my time. So I love what you're doing, and it's actually going to make me start incorporating some more of the things that you're doing as well.
Well, and I think your protein tip also, as moms, if our kids are not getting enough protein, they also will exhibit a lot of those same stresses. And so that I feel like has been helpful across the board with family, is making sure we're getting enough protein. And same with micronutrients. I feel like in the conversation about macros and calories, it led to women drastically under eating for a long time, and that still persists. But we didn't talk enough about micronutrients. And my theory is that that's actually a really important, to your point, signal of safety for the body. Because even if we're getting enough calories, if our body's not actually getting the nutrients it needs, it still can perceive that we're kind of in a famine type situation. And as women, our bodies are always on our side. They're built to hold on to things if they think we're going to have a famine situation. So I think for moms, especially, if for yourself and your kids, you can focus on getting enough protein and really just maxing out micronutrients by eating whatever food you're going to eat, the most nutrient dense options available for that. Your body will register that as feeling safer.
And that leads us into meal planning and prep. But what I love about what you just said is right now we're in a world where 70% of the food is processed foods. So when your kid goes to school and all of their friends are eating these packaged gummies and fruit roll-ups and juice boxes, and you send your child to school with a bison steak and an apple and some rice or some whole food, right? We're not cutting calories, but it's nutrient dense. They have this stigma to them. And this is something my children have faced. It's like they're not normal. And what I've tried to teach my children is you don't want to be normal in this world anymore. And take that as an empowering trait and not as something to be ashamed of. And that is something that's very difficult to teach children, because of course the one thing they want more than anything is to be accepted. But this also gets into meal planning and prep. And when we first were talking about making their own lunches and that sort of thing, what I did was I would say, okay, here are your choices for protein. Here are your choices for a treat or a carb or a vegetable, whatever it is. And then they get to put it together, so they take ownership. But it was always built around protein, because protein is going to stabilize that blood sugar. And most kids in school with ADHD and anxiety or depression are lacking protein, and their blood sugar is just going up and down, and it's driving the teachers nuts. And it doesn't have to be that way. So just by simply making some changes in their breakfast and their lunch, you're going to see a different child in school. But it takes a lot of planning, and it's actually not as difficult as you think it is. I can tell you that my youngest has had to become more vigilant about her diet lately because of hormones. And because of that, she's eating bison steak for lunch, whether we cook it at home right before she gets home for lunch, or she cooks it in the morning to take it to school, and some other stuff as well. But once you get into the routine, it really only takes a few minutes, and it's not that difficult to do. So can you give some tips on saving time and money for moms in this meal planning? Because it can seem overwhelming, and it's just so much easier just to go through the drive-through.
I totally can empathize with that. And yes, absolutely. I think this is a huge time and stress saver for moms. And also, just briefly to speak to what you said about kids, I would say it's also encourage your kids, if they feel like kind of the odd one out because of how they eat, they might end up becoming a trendsetter in that. Because I've seen that my kids are homeschooled, but they compete in public school sports, and their weird eating has kind of rippled through the team. And so I had a whole team of track athletes this summer that were eating enough protein. They were prioritizing whole food sources of nutrients. And when we DEXA'd them before and after the summer, they gained on average 6 to 8 pounds of muscle over the course of the summer. So kids especially, it can work so fast. And even if they're the weird one, they might be weird enough that someone else kind of takes note of their example. And then now they have community built up around how they eat that way. But I think from the mom's bandwidth side, meal planning and bulk cooking are absolute lifesavers, and for me, non-negotiables. Like with the amount my kids eat right now, I would not survive if I was trying to grocery shop, plan, and do all of that from scratch every single day. And so I rely heavily on an app called Real Plans, which is, it lets you use stuff you have in the house as well as add in things. They have tons of recipes in there. And I even have all my recipes in there now, and that lets me meal plan. I usually use a 2-week rotating menu that kind of changes seasonally. So that prioritizes in-season produce, and then protein sources can rotate. And then with Real Plans, I'm able to program that for bulk cooking. So I'll do like one big cooking day on the weekend, and then a smaller one some midpoint during the week to refresh anything that needs to be refreshed. So that cuts down because I don't have to worry about the stress of planning. I already have the plan ahead for 2 weeks at a time. And then I just spend usually 4 hours on a Saturday bulk cooking a lot of that. And it's funny because like last Saturday, my Oura Ring registered that I walked 10 miles in my kitchen bulk cooking, but now I don't have to do it for the rest of the week. And I, like you said, I like to center on the nutrient dense, high protein options, which for kids, especially and how hungry they are, I feel like is the only way that my kids are happy with this. So I'll make big batches of all the animal proteins. I love that you talk about wild game meats, and I do a lot of that, bison. Whether it's seafood, sometimes I'll make chicken salad, and make sure we always have the plain staples. Like you, bison steaks are always in the fridge, and that is a snack they can make anytime without asking me. It's always available. But I pre-make the proteins in bulk, because then those can be repurposed into soups and stews, into enchiladas, into omelets. Like there's so many different directions you can take those. And that's the part that takes the most time typically, is cooking the protein. It takes 5 minutes to make an omelet if the protein's cooked. And so I just have those labeled in the fridge in different containers. Sometimes I'll pre-make whole dinners that can just be put in the oven if we have a lot of activities at night. And then they know those are all available for breakfast and lunch as well. And like you, they don't have to pack to go somewhere, but they kind of know the building blocks that are available for any given meal. So they'll take it in lots of different directions depending on what they're craving. And same with like smoothie bars in the kitchen with enough protein added to it. Like they'll make those whenever they get hungry. And because the protein part's already cooked, they don't have to come to me to ask what they can eat. They don't have to come to me to wait for me to make food for them. So it also tends to be less stress across the board in the house because they're not hungry and they're not waiting for me to make them food when they are hungry.
I love that. And 2 tips for you busy moms that have made, because when I decide what I'm making for dinner, it's decided and it's cooked within 15 minutes. I don't have a lot of time, right? So number 1 is I love thrivemarket.com to get your staples, your vinegars, your oils, your snack food that's organic. Few ingredients for those chips or crackers if you must have them there. Nuts, seasoning, all of the staples. And then for my meats, I order it online. There's a couple that I've been using, no affiliation, buffalogal.com and forceofnature.com. I've tested all of them out. Honest Bison is a great one. It's a little more expensive. And all of these have more than just bison. They've got venison, elk, beef, even chicken. And the last one is North Star Bison. But it comes to the door. You're not doing that one extra errand out there. It's in my freezer. So when I decide, oh, do I want burgers or salmon tonight? I pull it out and I put it in cold water for 15 minutes. It's ready to go. And then I cook it. So it's not a lot of labor. It's cheaper because it's coming straight from the ranches or the farms. So you're saving money there. It's not more expensive. And like you said, when the kids are, over 6th grade or even 5th grade, they can pull something out of the freezer and defrost it for lunch. You don't need to do it. Teach them young. It takes a few extra minutes when they're younger to teach them, but then that is going to save you a lifetime of time later on when they're doing it themselves. So that is a huge thing for me. And what's so great too is my kids in college, they have no problem cooking for themselves. My son is going to be a fantastic husband because he knows how to cook and he does all of these great recipes because he loves food, but he does it in a healthy way. And so you're just setting up your child for just a lifelong healthy mindset around food. And food is such a trigger for so many people, and it's so hard in this world where most food isn't real food. And so you have to go back to nature again, just like, being out in the sunlight, you want to be eating from nature the way nature intended. Katie, I cannot believe how quickly this went. One last thing before we go. Us moms overcommit. We feel this guilt that we have to be a part of the PTA. We have to be a part of this. We have to be the soccer mom. We have to do this and keep the job and have dinner on the table and be a good wife. What is your advice on for those moms that overcommit their lives and spread themselves too thin?
Oh, this is such a good question. And I was really, really bad at this for a long time and actually had to learn sort of by necessity how to be better about this. I think one thing is we talked a lot about the importance of moms kind of doing things that fill their cup or bring them joy. I shy away a little bit from self-care just because that's kind of taken on the connotation of bubble baths or spa days. And for some women, that may not at all be the thing that brings you joy. But I would take it a step further and say, whatever the things are that fill you back up, that give you energy, that help you become a better version of yourself, put those things on the calendar as non-negotiables in advance. Same with like family dinners, go on the calendar in advance as non-negotiables in my house. So if somebody wants to schedule something or there's activities, I will not commit if it's on those time blocks because those are more important. But I think it's hard to do that when it's just for you. And I think like with a kind of a summary of all the things we talked about, putting those things on the calendar for you, that's not selfish. That's actually very, very selfless. And it will be pushed out if you don't schedule those things first. So whether it's walking or exercise or being in nature or journaling or painting, whatever it is that brings you joy and fulfillment, make that a non-negotiable on your schedule. Kind of go back home to yourself at least once a week or however often you need to be able to show up well. And also if you, like I did, have a little bit of that rescuer archetype within you where you think you have to, like I felt like for years I needed to sort of like, I only felt safe if I took care of everyone else around me and made sure everybody else was happy and okay and had everything they needed, which in a balanced state actually can be wonderful. But when it's not in a balanced state, it can be exhausting and deplete you, and then you can't show up well for anyone. So if you have the rescuer archetype like I did, maybe do the work to delve into that a little bit and learn over time that other people are also incredibly capable and brilliant at different things, and that we don't always have to be the one to step in and save things. And that often, especially if someone else has more bandwidth, we don't have to volunteer for all the things. I was raised very much in that way to like do all the things, sign up for all the things. And I've had to learn, and it was scary at first to say no. But as women, I think it's important to protect our no and to know that no can be a complete sentence, especially when saying yes comes at the expense of ourselves or our family.
And no is a complete sentence. I want to emphasize that. You do not have to give an explanation when someone says, can you do this? No, period.
Or if you need like a softer version, a magical statement is like, no, I'm not available for that, but thank you for considering me, or something. You can say it always kindly, but just never at the expense of yourself or your family.
Exactly. I love that. Katie, where can people find you?
Everything lives at wellnessmama.com. There's links there to the podcast and to social media and everything else.
Wonderful. Well, I love our discussion and I love the work you do. You're an inspiration, raising 6 amazing human beings. They are very lucky to have you. And I look up to you and I learn from you. So thank you for the work you do. And everyone else, thank you for joining us. Make sure you join us next week. We're going to have Nathan Bryan on talking about the importance of nitric oxide for your heart health. We know so many people are suffering from heart issues, and nitric oxide might be the missing link, right? And we talked today about the missing micronutrients and the diet and the food supply. If you are wondering what you're missing, make sure you reach out to me. Our discussion doesn't have to stop here. If you're feeling lost, don't know where to start with the supplements, just reach out to me and I will put together a free protocol just for you. Follow me on social media at Accelerated Health Products for more information, and join the free health group coaching on Telegram. There's no downside. I answer your questions, I post insights, and keep you moving forward. Remember that importance of dopamine to keep moving forward. Listen to this podcast on all podcast outlets like Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, and over 100 different platforms. Just look for Accelerated Health with Sara Banta. And you can use coupon podcast10 to get 10% off your first order at Accelerated Health Products. I'm live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so join me next time for more ways to unlock your health potential.